Welcome to the channel Calm Analysts. I'm Boris Tizenghausen. Today is July 8th. The main news at this moment: the armed forces of Ukraine continue to systematically destroy the oil and gas infrastructure of the aggressor state, the Russian Federation. The State Duma is already talking about a deep crisis. The Speaker of the State Duma, Volodin, has even resorted to open whining and shrill complaints, but more on that a bit later. But first, let's talk about where our drones struck today. Several critically important sites were hit at once. So, the armed forces of Ukraine struck an oil refinery in Tatarstan, an oil refinery in the Saratov region, a compressor station in Kuban, and a military airfield in the Voronezh region. And that's still far from a complete list of today's targets. The Rosneft oil refinery in Saratov was hit, as well as the Krasnodar compressor station, a very complex facility, the military airfield in Borysoglebsk, and also 2 oil tankers near Taganrog and another dozen tankers in the Sea of Azov. Additionally, a petrochemical plant in Nizhnekamsk, an enormous factory city, is ablaze. Local residents confirmed the strike on the oil refinery in Saratov and the fire there. This is one of the oldest oil refineries in Russia. Its processing capacity is nearly 5 million tons. In Tatarstan, judging by the footage I'm about to show you, a fire broke out at one of the largest oil enterprises, the Nizhnekamsk Taneko Oil Refinery, with a capacity of 16.2 million tons of oil per year. Well, let's take a moment to watch this truly remarkable and detailed video footage, which clearly shows how this enormous, sprawling industrial factory city is burning in several different places all at the same time. It is quite a sight to see the smoke and flames rising from various points across the massive complex. Please take a very close look at these striking images as they unfold right before our eyes. Beautiful. In short, Ukrainian drones are literally taking out the remaining oil refineries in droves. But that's not all. In Kuban, as a result of an attack, the Krasnodar compressor station is on fire, a very, very important station. Basically, this compressor station maintains the necessary pressure and ensures the uninterrupted transportation of natural gas through several main pipelines. It was commissioned back in 2002 and it operates on the Blue Stream main gas pipeline, providing gas processing and its further transportation. So, some unknown drones showed up and now this station is on fire. Well, they've really started targeting the gas infrastructure of the Russian Federation. Well, you were warned there in Russia. If you keep this up, you'll be riding horses again. Your oil and gas infrastructure will be wiped out. The Russians didn't listen. The old man, detached from reality and with wandering eyes, keeps repeating, "Our boys are advancing, they're pounding at the front, advancing everywhere, pounding, pounding." Well, they're pounding, pounding. Soon, there will be nothing left at all of Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. Besides that, just recently, the armed forces of Ukraine literally destroyed a convoy of Russian tankers in the Sea of Azov. But what did the Russians do? That's right, they sent the convoy again. More precisely, they added the tankers that didn't burn the first time and sent them off. The first time, 12 tankers were destroyed. And how can you not think of Putin here? A couple of years ago, when he was asked, "So what's the point? What's the outcome of this war?" Putin said, "Well, there are already some results. The Sea of Azov has now become an internal sea of the Russian Federation," and he giggled like an old pervert. An internal sea of Russia? Well, a couple of years have passed, and now Ukraine's drone forces are taking out entire convoys of Russian tankers in the Sea of Azov, disabling ports, and controlling the route in the Azov region, which is now called the Road of Death. And they've also struck all the major oil refineries in the Russian Federation. Not so funny now, Putin? How's that internal sea doing? It turns out that now the Sea of Azov is under the control of drone forces, and without Magyar's approval, not a single tanker will move anywhere. So the first time, 12 tankers were hit, and more were added today. Now in total, 21 tankers have been struck by our drones. Just imagine how stupid the Russians are. Once again, they sent a group of tankers with fuel to Crimea. And of course, our drones took them out there. So overall, the result is disappointing for them. All of this happened in just 72 hours. As I see it, soon Putin will have no fleet left at all. Not the Black Sea, not the Shadow, not the Baltic. But that's not all yet. Last night, the Rostov region was subjected to a massive air attack in the Taganrog Bay. As a result of the attack, 2 more tankers heading to Rostov-on-Don were damaged. That's it, it's over. Close the Sea of Azov, although Ukrainian drones have already closed it. And of course, against the backdrop of all this news, State Duma Speaker Volodin called on Russians to unite and, I quote, not vibrate because of the fuel crisis. I don't know where Volodin gets this kind of terminology from. Russians, what's wrong with you? Putin started the war, look, and all you need to do is just unite and not vibrate in the corners anywhere. In fact, Volodin's statement itself shows how both Volodin and the deputies in the State Duma have started to vibrate themselves. Despite all these bravado statements, you can sense how a sticky fear is already creeping into the minds of Russian officials. Residents of Russia, by the way, including State Duma deputies, let's all unite around Putin. We must not panic in the face of the fuel crisis, Volodin urged from the podium. According to him, panic plays into the hands of Russia's enemies who are trying to destroy the country's economy. Let me quote the full phrase now. When we face challenges, we start to waver, to panic. All of this benefits the enemy. We need to be aware of that, Volodin said, adding that it is necessary to be able to take a hit and, attention, to go all the way. For what purpose? For what reason should Russians go all the way? For the sake of Konstantinovka, which is foreign to them. That's why such foolish statements in the style of Soviet propaganda actually have the opposite effect. When a well-fed, shiny-faced, overindulged Volodin in an expensive suit stands at the podium and says, "Russians, we must rally around Putin and go all the way." Volodin also emphasized that Russia will overcome the problems at the gas stations, just as it has dealt with other problems. Did they want to ruin our financial economy? It didn't work, Volodin shouted from the podium. Well, first of all, the night is still young, and second, who is actually doing all this? So who is destroying the Russian economy? Who is the main destroyer of Russia and the Russian economy? Who is this bold little ghoul? Let's name him. In general, Volodin's statements actually contribute to panic, not the other way around. They want to destroy us, but we must go all the way for Putin. We need to die for it. There won't be any gasoline, but we'll manage. But that's not for sure. The most interesting thing is that when Volodin says we need to tighten our belts and get through the fuel crisis, he forgets to mention that Russian officials don't feel the fuel crisis at all. Unlike ordinary Russians, they have gasoline. Deputies use cars provided by the Presidential Property Management Department of the Russian Federation through a company called Transport Combine Russia. And in this case, the car, the driver, the gasoline, the maintenance, and the insurance are all paid for by the state, that is, by Russian citizens, as part of maintaining the vehicle fleet. In other words, Russians are paying for Volodin's gasoline. And as you can imagine, neither Volodin nor other State Duma deputies are standing in line for gasoline. But it's ordinary Russians who have to go all the way to the end. Who else would it be? For the yachts and palaces of Russian officials, forward and to the end. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important. You can do it right now. We are fighting against Putin's propaganda, and together it will be much easier for us to do this. So be sure to subscribe. And right now, Ukraine is truly performing an incredible feat. It will go down in every history textbook. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. Today we are starting a fundraiser for EcoFlow charging stations for the favorite Unmanned Systems Battalion of the 107th Brigade. The battalion is carrying out combat missions in the Pokrovsk direction, near Dobropilya. The soldiers have recorded a video message for you. Please take a look.
Ми, військовослужбовці 2-го батальйону безпілотних систем «Фаворит», виконуємо бойові завдання по знищенню ворога на Покровському напрямку та в районі Добропілля. Звертаємось до Бориса Тисенгаузена та спільноти каналу Бориса з проханням допомогти закрити збір на придбання зарядних станцій для АКБ ударних дронів. Разом ми велика сила. Разом переможемо. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Let's help our UAV operators from the favorite Unmanned Systems Battalion. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There are mono, private, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. The favorite fighters relentlessly strike at the occupiers. And in every episode, I want to personally thank you on behalf of myself and the hundreds of our soldiers whom you have already helped. If you're watching on another channel, there's always a QR code, which also leads to the fundraiser. Thank you so much for supporting our soldiers. Well, it seems that the Russian market doesn't believe Putin and Volodin. Look at what's happening. The market is pricing in a scenario of a deep economic crisis. Russian stocks have crashed to one of their lowest levels in recent decades. This is according to Russian economists. In other words, the Russian stock market has been declining for the 17th week in a row. Expectations on the Russian market are worsening every day, notes Finam analyst Dmitry Lozovoy. Instead of a peaceful agreement on Ukraine, escalation is taking place. Drones are attacking oil refineries, which is fueling inflation, and the central bank may respond by raising the key interest rate. Well, things like this happen, they do. It will get even worse. This is just the beginning, just the first signs of the crisis. The real crisis will hit the Russian Federation in the fall. Not just a crisis, but also problems, very serious problems with fuel. There simply won't be any. The harvest won't be gathered. There will be problems with meat, with milk. In fact, food products in general won't be able to be delivered. What are you going to do, Russians? And here's another piece of news. The largest oil refinery in Russia, the Omsk Refinery, which was recently attacked, has stopped processing crude oil. This is reported by Reuters. That's it. In other words, they hit exactly where they needed to. Not only did it burn beautifully, but now the Omsk refinery has completely shut down. Every 10th liter of gasoline and diesel fuel was produced at this refinery. Add to this the fact that the Omsk refinery produced 15% of all Russian aviation kerosene. In other words, every day, every night, one or two of the remaining refineries simply go out of operation. All major refineries have been attacked, and the problems in Crimea are growing. That is, Putin wants to hold on to this suitcase without a handle, but it's getting harder and harder to carry. And give back what you stole, you mangy bald scoundrel. So in Crimea, everything is getting harder and harder. I went to read what the locals are writing in the chats. Let me quote you just a couple of messages. There will be no new batch of QR codes in Sevastopol today, said the locally appointed head. There will also be no free sale of fuel at Eitan gas stations today. The enemy has started massively targeting tankers that transport fuel to Crimea through the Sea of Azov. We were waiting for these tankers, but they were attacked. All of this is in the Sevastopol chats. I'm about to quote something for you that people have long been imprisoned for over there, and now they're starting to write it themselves. So, let me quote a message from the chat. Yesterday, the enemy published footage showing them striking our tankers. 8 tankers, a cargo ship, and so on. In general, I already told you about this. Quote, attention, the organization of these tankers' voyage is notable. This is what Russians are writing in Sevastopol chats. A defenseless, dense mass of ships in the middle of the sea, which is simply a shooting gallery for Ukrainian FP2 drone operators. No cover from Black Sea Fleet ships, which can barely protect themselves these days, nor any fire teams on the ships themselves. If before we used to attack in tank columns under drones, now apparently we'll be sailing in a wake formation under drones. What kind of discrediting of the Black Sea Fleet is this if it can't even protect itself? And what's going on in Sevastopol? Are the occupiers completely upset? But you know, in the Russian Federation it's clear, they are the enemy, they attacked us. But there are still scum entrenched in European countries who are saving Putin. The International Olympic Committee, at a meeting of its executive board, reinstated the rights of the Russian Olympic Committee and recommended that international federations lift restrictions on Russian athletes. This paves the way for Russia to participate in the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. The president of the International Olympic Committee, Kirsty Coventry, stated that the International Olympic Committee wants to ensure that all athletes have the opportunity to participate in the Olympic Games and not be held responsible for the actions of their government. The decision by Kirsty Coventry and the International Olympic Committee was immediately welcomed by Russia's Minister of Sports, Mikhail Degtyarev. He was simply delighted. You know, if I were asked to give an example of the most unscrupulous organization in Europe, I would name the International Olympic Committee. They lifted the sports sanctions from Russia. So, has Russia stopped killing in Ukraine? Has Russia stopped waging war? In fact, just this past week, Russia carried out 2 massive attacks on Ukraine, killing 30 people in the first strike and then another 19 in the second, destroying entire residential buildings. And you corrupt bastards, are lifting sanctions from them. Although, what is there to be surprised about? The International Olympic Committee has always been corrupt and unscrupulous. You know, just imagine for a second that during World War II, someone suddenly decided to hold the Olympics, and Nazi Germany would participate there under its own flag. And at that moment, when Hitler was killing the residents of European countries, not only in concentration camps, but also in the war, seizing foreign territories, at that very moment, the International Olympic Committee says, well, sport is outside of politics. These athletes shouldn't have to answer for that. I wish that every night the dead children whom Putin killed in Ukraine would come in the dreams of these corrupt ghouls. Let them come every night. Today, the Russians struck Kharkiv, hitting a residential 5-story building directly. 2 people were killed, 23 wounded, including 4 children. All these officials from the Olympic committees, sitting somewhere in offices in Switzerland, think that the war is very far from them. They are mistaken. Obviously, they won't watch these scenes. Obviously, they don't hear the air raid sirens. They don't run at night wrapping their children in blankets to the shelter. But everything will have to be paid for. Maybe not physically, but morally and mentally for sure. And when the monster you have nurtured goes to war against Europe, and it will if you continue, then the officials, including those of the International Olympic Committee, will also be to blame. You are showing this bald slime that you can kill children and still have sanctions lifted from you. In other words, you are signing documents granting him impunity. Although, who am I even saying this to? It's not little children sitting in the Olympic Committee. They all understand perfectly well. And of course, there is probably a very real price tag for turning a blind eye to the crimes of Putin's Russia. There is. And I would also like to remind the officials of the International Olympic Committee and Miss Coventry that every day it's not Putin himself personally launching rockets and drones at Ukraine with his own hands, but those very Russians who, according to the IOC, are supposedly innocent and should not be held responsible for their government. And let me remind you that life, as one Ukrainian oligarch used to say, is like a supermarket. Take whatever you want, but at the exit there's always a checkout, so you'll have to pay for everything. And now 2 pieces of news. Actually, 3 pieces of news about how Donald Trump is simultaneously saving and sinking Putin. I honestly don't understand what's going on here, but let's try to analyze it. 2 pieces of news. The price of Russian Urals oil in the first days of July dropped to the level of February, meaning it returned to the values that had held before the start of the war in the Middle East, before the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, about $41 per barrel. This could mean the end of favorable conditions for the Russian budget, according to financial analysts. And immediately after that, Donald Trump stated that, in his opinion, the truce between the US and Iran was over. The price of oil instantly surged upward after this statement. Then there was an announcement that Iran was once again under sanctions, full sanctions. Once again, Iranian oil is under sanctions. I understand that it just so happened, but sometimes it seems to me that some initiative group periodically pulls the Botox maggot out of the swamp. Just as he's about to drown, starts sinking, gurgling with that false jaw of his, and then bam, they pull him out just a little bit above the swamp. He starts to sink again. They keep saving him over and over. Don't you get that feeling too? By the way, Trump made a harsh statement about Iran. Let me quote, "I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum, sick people. They're run by sick people, ruthless and cruel. If they get nuclear weapons, they'll use them. It's just a waste of time with them. They're liars. We made a deal with them. Everyone agreed, no nuclear weapons. But the deal fell through. They go to the press and say, we never even talked about that. There's something wrong with them. They're cuckoo," said Donald Trump. Well, let us reveal a little secret to Donald Trump. That character who used to walk around Anchorage with him in 7-centimeter heels, the one who sits in the Kremlin's dungeons and occasionally touches up his eyebrows with Leningrad brown mascara, he's been cuckoo for a long time too. He also used to say he would never attack Ukraine, and then he did. Basically, he's been lying his whole life and doesn't even try to hide it. In my opinion, he even seems to enjoy it somehow. So it's not just in Iran that scum are in power, but also in the Russian Federation. But just a couple of hours ago in Ankara, Donald Trump, at a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, shared some important news for Ukraine. Good news. Trump announced that the United States will grant Ukraine a license to produce Patriot missiles. Let me quote, "A little bird told me that we will give Ukraine the right to make Patriots. We will show you how to make them. Then you won't be able to complain that we're not giving you enough. Make them yourselves," Donald Trump said to Volodymyr Zelensky. And more from Trump's statements. Trump stated that strikes on Russian oil refineries are an escalation, but they could help end the war. So over there in Russia, they probably no longer understand how to properly comment on what Donald Trump is saying. They only recently made corrections, to the new history textbooks saying that Trump is good, Trump is great. Now it turns out they'll have to rewrite the history textbooks again. Well, and it seems Putin has also decided to show his strength ahead of the NATO summit. Once again, he's striking Ukraine, once again hitting residential buildings. In short, an absolutely deranged terrorist. But all of this really looks like agony. It really does, especially against the backdrop of the harshest, most powerful and precise strikes on Russian oil refineries. Now the whole of Russia will be howling in outrage over there. And it feels like there are more and more reasonable people now. Here's some breaking news. The International Biathlon Union has refused to allow Russians to compete, defying the decision of the corrupt International Olympic Committee. So there are plenty of good people out there, and I believe there will be even more. And you, my friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel, don't forget. And let's support our UAV operators from the favorite Unmanned Systems Battalion of the 107th Brigade, who are relentlessly targeting the enemy. The link to donate is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.